Welcome to Searching for Answers. We're glad you're searching along with us as we dig into the Word of God in an attempt to learn more about what the text meant in its original writing and what it means for our lives today. On our discussion panel this time, Dr. William Johnson, New Testament scholar, Pastor Rochelle Webster, a member of the pastoral staff of the Redlands SDA Church for Family Ministry, right? And Dr. Leo Ranzelin, the Associate Dean of the School of Religion at Loma Linda University. My name is John Jones. I'm at the Divinity School at La Sierra, and we are in the Epistle to the Hebrews. People think, first of all, of chapter 11 when they think of this epistle, the faith chapter, and that's right where we are. So grab your Bibles, whatever you've got by way of translation, different versions, whatever. If you have more than one, it's a good idea to compare them. We will be reading from various translations as we talk through our conversation here today. And you may find some differences in the translation that adds interest, and we invite you to even send us an email if you have questions about some of the things we're saying. We are looking at the pre-flood heroes of faith. We have talked about Abel in chapter 11, verse 4. We've talked a little bit as well about Enoch in verse 5 and 6. Now we come down to Noah. And Bill, I'm going to ask you to read that 7th verse again. We read it last time. Okay. But refresh our memory a little with this verse, and let's talk about it.
Okay. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith.
Something completely unseen, not only by Noah, but by anyone. This is kind of the intent.
That's picking up verse 1.
Exactly.
Yes.
Faith is the evidence, or it is the conviction of things not seen.
Yeah.
And so here is Noah. He acts on something which is not seen, but through faith, as it were, he sees the unseen.
Yeah. Even so, he respected the warning, huh?
Right.
And built a vessel, an ark. Yeah. This is not a boat for fishing or carrying cargo or something. It is simply a lifesaver. And by this he condemned the world and became an heir to the righteousness that's in accordance with faith. What else calls our attention here in this verse 7? Leo?
When you go back and read the story in Genesis with care, one gains the sense that this was quite an act of faith on the part of Noah, because deluges that just did not occur in that world. And oftentimes film depicts how extraordinary that event truly was in that ancient world. And so for him to have been warned by God and say, you know, this is an unseen thing, right? And to step out in action, a remarkable example of what we've been talking about, faithfulness and persevering faith.
John, it's as though you have two classes, two groups standing over against the other. The man of faith, and then you have the world that's mocking and disbelieving. So by his faith, he condemned the world.
Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting.
It's not that he personally does so, but his faith is a kind of a witness against them in a sense.
Exactly.
That's interesting. It's not that Noah bears anyone any ill will here, but
he believes, they do not believe.
Yeah.
And he acts on his belief.
And that activity is in harmony with the will of God, well-pleasing to God. And in and of itself, it convicts and calls into question the world's values and lifestyle and activity.
I don't know. Rochelle, anything else before we move on?
It's a I think it's helpful to see Noah's faith as a it's almost in the same light as when Paul talks about the law. In some ways, something that stands something in contrast or enables you to see that which is wrong versus right. But I know that, at least in pop culture, Noah, stories of Noah have him actively condemning the world, right?
Shaking his
like
finger.
shaking his finger, shaking his fist, and saying,
at the world.
and saying, get away. The actual, like the visual image of people carrying signs walking around. There is that image of Noah condemning the world and saying, you horrible world, and rejoicing a little bit. I mean, there's definitely pop culture references or Hollywood films that show a very different picture of Noah. So I think it's helpful to push back against that, and have, because I think sometimes we struggle with, we believe something, and does that give us the right to be deeply condemning towards other people? Should we act in ways that say, you are to be, you are on the other side of the pale, God.
You're gonna get.
Yeah, and I think that in Hebrews, that tension is there, of people who feel like they are attacked and want to push back against it, but that view of faithfulness bearing witness on its own, that you don't have to actively be condemning somebody else, that you don't go out with a intention for harm, but that just by living a different way, that might speak volumes about the way the world is responding or the way the world is structured right now.
Typically, this is presented that Noah preached for 120 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it doesn't say that at all.
Yeah.
He believed God and he built the ark.
Yeah.
And thereby, he condemned the world.
Right.
Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Abel, being dead, yet speaks, his life spoke.
Yes.
Noah speaks, in a sense, of that which is not known. But in both cases, their actions are a testimony.
That's right.
In both cases,
And let's not forget how this author characterizes this rescuing of his household. The word here is soterian, salvation. It's got salvific dimensions to this act on his part, to build the ark and to save and rescue his family.
So now the word righteousness emerges here, Verse 7. He's an heir to the righteousness that is according to faith. It's hard to know how to translate that a little, but that belongs to or pertains to faith. Katapistin for the Greek speakers watching us in this program. It is literally righteousness by faith. That's the connection that's being drawn here, isn't it? No. Noah is warned about what has not yet been seen. Next verse, Abraham goes to a place he doesn't know where he's going. Isn't that interesting? So our author is really bringing out the faith aspect.
Yeah.
And so they're emphasizing the limitations of the understanding of these great heroes of faith. There's much they could not know, much they could not understand, much they could not envision, but they act.
And so in some sense, that phrase Noah, about things not yet seen. Right? That just is a thread that just seems to run through this chapter. They act on things not yet seen.
You see how skillfully this chapter is put together. Well, like the whole
book.
So, the threads.
It's incredible.
Idea is introduced, and then the little threads come up to link it all together.
Well, that's good preaching. This is a letter, but it's a sermon too.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
ancient orators knew how to weave things together and to drop hints and pick them up along the way and develop the ideas. So, Leo, verse 8, where shall we do? Down to maybe through Sarah here in
Yep, through
verse
12.
12? Let's do that.
Okay. So here, verse 8.
Yeah.
So by faith, Abraham, when he was called, he obeyed and went out into a place which he was about to receive for an inheritance. And he went forth, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as a stranger in the land of the promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Verse 11. Now, this first clause, I found quite a few English translations didn't bring all out
That's right.
here,
There are a couple
which
of-
I thought was
Yeah.
not right. But what it says is this: by faith, Sarah herself also was barren. That gets underscored, and yet she received the ability to conceive, even beyond here her procreation years, since she regarded him faithful who had promised. Therefore also there was born from one man, and him as good as dead, as many descendants as the stars of the heaven in multitude, and innumerable as the sand which is by the shore of the sea.
Which translation, I'm going to ask you with a wink, which version, Brother Leo?
I think you know this is the Nestle app.
Yes, yes. Leo is reading directly from the Greek as here, but yes, and you got it. The syntax are complicated here. The sentences are fold in upon themselves,
Exactly.
and it's not easy to unpack this very dense syntactic structure into English that we have here in this paragraph. You did that very well. Thank you. So here we go again. Abraham setting forth a place he doesn't know, and he's living as you translated correctly, and the New Revised Standard doesn't have it quite adequately. He lives as an alatrion, a stranger, you know, a wanderer, an outsider, a person who is an other person, an outlander or something like that. He's a stranger. I think we're going to, that's an echo that's going to reoccur when we are all called strangers eventually. We are called to share Abraham's pilgrimage in a way, aren't we? We'll get to that. But again, our skillful preacher is planting some time bombs here that are going to explode verses and chapters later as we go.
But John, I would like to add here, I think this author clearly expects that his audience has competencies on the Old Testament.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden now when we come to Abraham, it seems to me, Genesis 12 is just right here in the background, where we have the Abrahamic promise of the land and of his descendants becoming a great nation with many descendants. You just have to know that as you read through this.
That's right, and he's looking forward to it, he and Sarah both, but they don't see it. Now, writing centuries later, from this perspective, the readers can look back and say, aha, that did come true, didn't it?
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Abraham is really one of the iconic figures of this chapter. He pops up again in verse 17 and following. We'll get back to him again as we go. Anything else on this moving story, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob,
And Sarah.
and Sarah for sure.
It makes me think of in our toddler class, we're writing some curriculum at the moment that is, so this is like 3-year-olds, and we're writing curriculum called God's Family, and we're kind of doing this connection with one of my parents is a great writer, and so she's doing this connection with our family and God's family. And so from the very beginning, kids are learning the story of God's family. God calls a family that'll be rooted in their DNA of their understanding of that's part of my story too, right? And I think that that's what this author is building on those foundations, that sometimes you get reassured not just in the content of it, but in the reminder of the things that are core to you, that you grew up with in your DNA. Like telling the story again, the very act of retelling the story of this is who you are, this is who you belong to, these are the people. If you're wrestling with identity, coming back to those stories that you learn from a child, from a little baby, ground you and root you again. So just as we were reading through this, I was thinking, we're introducing, in my own context, we're introducing these names to kids that this audience may well have been introduced to, and the act of calling them back and retelling that story in and of itself has an assurance.
Yeah.
Even without necessarily the content of it, which does, just the telling of it.
Yeah. The telling of the story, the retelling, is interesting for what it says and for what it leaves out.
Yeah.
Right.
The Genesis accounts of the faith of Abraham and the faith of Sarah really introduce elements totally foreign here.
Yeah.
Abraham, the great hero of faith, was also a person who struggled with doubt.
Yeah.
Okay. God, now he did go out. There's no suggestion that he questioned God when God said, go to the unknown place. Just go. I'll show you. But he did doubt when God said, you're going to have a son.
Yeah.
The years go by, he gets older, Sarah gets older. They're too old to have. And Abraham doubts. He not only doubts, he takes another woman, to his bed. Okay. So that is all passed over. What about Sarah? Well, when the angels came to her and said, this time next year you're going to have a son, she just put her hands on her hips. She laughed right out. Me have a son? Don't you know how old I am? It's not possible. So it's interesting, isn't it? But the point is, it sort of comes back to the question I raised an earlier time. Are these ordinary people or extraordinary people? I think if you just read this, they're extraordinary people, incredible faith. You put this in light of the Old Testament context, very ordinary people, struggling with faith, struggling to believe, going ahead in the midst of doubt.
So here are these people, icons of faith. But wait a minute. There is that counterpart lurking beneath the surface. Sometimes we have to go back to the Old Testament to see it. But yeah, I think that's why these stories resonate. I mean, if it were so superhuman, we couldn't relate. We couldn't hook into these stories, could we? Right. Yeah.
The thing that I'm also struck here about Abraham is that he steps out with these two promises, right? Of the promised land, and it says, he's going to go to the land of the promise, right? He steps out and he goes forth. And then he also is aware that, as Dr. Johnson just said, that his son's going to be the heir, great nation's going to come forth. But somewhere along the line, in verse 10, it says, for he was looking forward to the city which has foundations, right? Whose architect and builder is God. Somewhere along the line, Abraham grasps that this promise is not an end in itself, that there's more to life. There's more that God has in store for me. There's this heavenly city that he's looking forward to. So how did he come to that understanding? And clearly that is very helpful in his persevering, faithful living.
So we get the first hints of transcendence here now, don't we?
Yes.
Something that actually is greater than anything we know in this world. God is somehow the architect and builder beyond anything that we know. Here, the story, together with Enoch, who is translated into the heavenly realms, here the story begins to now move more explicitly beyond the nuts and bolts of our daily lives.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's one thing to be faithful within this realm. It's another to envision a greater beyond somehow, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, connected to that, is this phrase, as good as dead, that reminded me of the phrase with Abel and Cain, by faith he still speaks even though he is dead. This concept of, I think it probably resonated a lot, potentially, if people are being persecuted or if you're struggling with,
Yeah.
does my life matter, or does this matter? Is what I'm involved in, I feel I might lose my life or I might be dead. Is anything significant? And this concept of this descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore from one who was dead. I mean, that's a beautifully evocative image for me, and I think probably for those who were wrestling with feeling as good as dead in some ways.
Right.
So the goal now in verse 16 is identified as a heavenly goal, a better country, qualitatively, not just quantitatively, right?
Interesting shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, up to now it's been, sort of this world. But then there's a sudden shift here to the eternal world. I can't help thinking and hearing again in my mind, as I read these verses about Abraham and Sarah, again 11:1, the title deed of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, the hope motif, okay? It's not just an optimism, I hope it will turn out. No. There's a certainty about it, okay? There's a conviction about it, even though it's not seen.
Yeah, excuse me, go ahead.
What I've been doing is trying to sketch the theology and praxis that this author wants this audience who's going through a great deal of suffering and hardship and spiritual discouragement.
Yeah.
And the list is so robust and complex because on the one hand we've spoken about, the Christ's Melchizedekian priesthood and his eternal once and for all sacrifice, cleanse our consciousness so that we can now enter into the presence of God. Wonderful stuff. But he also wants us to know that the day is drawing near. And in a little while, he's going to come, and he's not going to delay. So he wants me to have the second advent before me as I make this pilgrimage and journey through this suffering. And there's more pieces to that pilgrimage and journey.
Yeah.
Hope, it's just remarkably complex and so comprehensive.
So, yeah, that's important. So far, I mean, the eschaton has always been there from the first chapter in these last days. But really, so far, it's mostly been looking back at Calvary, at the Christ sacrifice, looking at the present, at his high priestly role. Now the focus begins to change. And through the last few chapters here, we will see the end time feeling picking up a little more here, won't we? Yeah. So, verses 13 through 16. Rochelle, we may not get through discussing this paragraph, but read it for us, if you will. Which translation do you have?
I have the NIV.
Okay.
All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised, they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them.
Well, that's a stunning statement, isn't it? That last verse, the last sentence, isn't it? So what strikes you, Rochelle, as you look over this, as you've read it for us?
That first verse, they did not receive the things promised, they only saw and welcomed them from a distance. I know that I have occasionally thought, it would have been lovely to have been alive in the time of Jesus and to have seen things, or it would have been lovely to have been alive in the time of Moses, or seen the sea parted, seen the miracles, and if only I had been alive at a different time, maybe things would be simpler in terms of faith. And this this reminds us that the heroes of faith in the past shared a lot in common with us. That they too had to have things they hoped for that was not yet seen, things that had not gotten figured out. They did not have all their questions answered. They saw them and welcomed them from a distance. They knew that it was coming, but they still were waiting in anticipation. And I think I resonate with that a lot.
Yeah. The idea of there being strangers and foreigners, like Abraham, now his descendants, all these, in fact, have that sense of being out of step with the rest of the world in some way, don't they? Bill, anything that you want to pick up on here with 13 and
the pilgrim idea. Pilgrimage.
It's beginning to emerge now, isn't it?
Oh, it emerges very clearly in this paragraph here, which raises a lot of interesting questions to me. Okay, it's interesting to reflect on the songs and hymns that we sing. Some of them older. I think of, well, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. If heaven's not my home, Lord, what will I do? There's that. Heaven is my home. But yet there's the other hymn, this is my Father's world, you see. So that is something I think it's worthwhile reflecting on together. I think some Christians and some Seventh-day Adventists would be more comfortable with the first. We're really just here a little while, and the real home is ahead of us. Others would say, no, we belong here because this is my Father's world. Okay.
And we have a role to play in it.
Yes, that's right. Even the word world is interesting to see the way that is used, even in the words of Jesus and in the Gospels. Sometimes in a very negative sense, sometimes in a positive sense. We may reflect on this.
Right. The earliest first vision within the Adventist movement is of God's people, pilgrim people traveling from this world to the next.
That's right.
We begin to sense that now as we move through this chapter. We'll continue looking at this pilgrimage calling next time on Searching for Answers.